Okay, so I had chapter 6 called Shopping for Sex for my presentation, and more specifically, I covered pages 170 through 186, which covers sex in the city, commercialized sex, and the throes of sex work in the industry. Levy starts out the chapter by talking about the TV show Sex in the City, which aired in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And she says that the show started out as a show about women having sex like men, and kind of was seen like through the male gaze, like everything was compared to what men did, even though the characters were women. Over time, it became more about independence of the female characters, though, and the pursuit of the characters was centered around consumption rather than sex. Sex was just one thing that they consumed, but they just consumed a lot. They consumed a lot of media. They went shopping a lot, and they consumed a lot of high-end products like high-end purses and expensive shoes. The show also romanticized the weather, the offices of Vogue magazine, the supposed disposable income of the average journalist, which doesn't really exist, and mostly accumulation of just like stuff and experiences. And overall, the ethos of the show is about women getting themselves the best and the most, both sexually and materially. Like I said, the show kind of divided the behavior of the characters into like a man's or like a woman's. So if a woman was confident, she wasn't just a confident woman, she had the ego of a man. The characters also cared more about the way they were experienced during sex rather than what they experienced. And this like perpetuated the idea of women measuring men's interest in their experiences instead of focusing on their own satisfaction. Levy then segued into the treatment of sex workers. She said that the sex industry uses a group of mostly traumatized individuals as erotic role models, and that most women in the sex industry, whether it's in their childhood, in their adulthood, or in their career, are subject to sexual abuse at some point in their lives. She also said that 60% to 90% of sex workers experience incest or some form of childhood sexual abuse. This was part of Melissa Farley's study, and the other part was about PTSD and sex workers suffering from PTSD. And it found that 2/3 of sex workers who were interviewed by Melissa Farley suffered from PTSD, which is twice as high as the percentage of Vietnam vets with PTSD. Also, the severity of symptoms among the sex workers, from emotional numbness to recurrent nightmares to even flashbacks, was more extreme for the sex workers than for the veterans. She also compares prostitutes and porn stars from the view of Melissa Farley, who says that pornography is just a form of prostitution. It's just documented and is like viewable for the general public. She also says that prostitution today is a toxic cultural product, and because of that toxic cultural product, all women are socialized to present themselves as sexually desirable. Jenna Jameson, on the other hand, says that the sex industry is fluid, and porn, stripping, and posing nude are all interconnected. And then she uses the example that many strippers turn to porn because they want to increase their rates. So different people in different parts of the sex industry kind of overlap in order to make their main occupation more prominent and better. Jenna Jameson is seen as the like spokeswoman of the sex industry. She wrote a book called How to Fuck Like a Porn Star. She views sexuality as a tool and a weapon, and says that porn is one of the few jobs for women in which they can look around and feel powerful when they get to a certain level. But Levy says that she contradicts herself in her view of the sex industry. Apparently, Jenna Jameson said that if she had a daughter, she would lock her in the house before she'd let her get involved in the sex industry. So Levy asks why she would say that if she is so behind the sex industry. Levy also says that Jameson is not sexually uninhibited like she thinks. She's actually sexually damaged because of the abuse that she experienced at the beginning of her career. Also, Jameson's view of sexuality as a tool and a weapon perpetuates the idea that sex is a commodity, which goes into Levy's idea of commercialized sex. the sex industry removes the human factor from sex and makes it about big boobs, bleached hair, long nails, and this is what creates the commercialized sex and makes it a commodity to sell. Faye Waddleton is somebody that Levy touches upon to enforce this, and Waddleton says that we need to be taught how to enjoy sexuality just like we need to learn how to dress ourselves and eat properly. So sexuality is something that can be done either correctly or incorrectly, like dressing ourselves and eating properly can be done correctly or incorrectly. And Levy says that this idea contributes to commercialized sex. Levy says that in order to get rid of the idea of commercialized sex, we need to acknowledge that sexuality is personal and unique, and it is something that we learn from ourselves. It comes from identifying and satisfying tastes, which are unique to each person, and that is how we can make sexuality a weapon, not through commercialized sex. And Levy says all of this doesn't come from the porn industry, it comes from within ourselves. And these are my discussion questions.